The season is off and running in Knoxville, Tennessee. Helping us break down all things Vols basketball, good friend Chase Thomas joins the show. He's the host of the Chase Thomas podcast, also the founder and publisher of Vols Hub. Does a fantastic job of talking all things Tennessee sports. Chase, what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time and excited to talk what Rick Barnes and the boys are doing on the hardwood.
Absolutely. I'm glad we're doing this after Saturday and not after the Florida game, because if we had taped this on Wednesday of last week, this would have been a less fun conversation. The vibes would have been a whole lot lower coming out of what we saw with that 30-point beatdown in Gainesville versus stealing a win late in Austin. So the vibes are all the way back up. Got Georgia coming in. First ranked matchup between Georgia and Tennessee ever in hoops, which is pretty insane.
Wow.
Like that's never happened. That's I'll go ahead and say a Georgia problem as to why these two teams have not been ranked at the same time in hoops and played each other. But yeah, I'm excited. We're taping this before that, and I appreciate you having me on. Now you're on my show last week, and I guess it's kind of like a home and home type deal. And obviously we did the panel back in Athens and met in person a couple months back. But yeah, man, good to be on, and I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, Chase, I appreciate you coming on and excited to link up with you here soon in person at Thompson Bowling Arena. I'm sure at Lindsey Nelson. We're going to get back to Knoxville very, very soon. But again, I want to talk about Rick Barnes, this team. Let's first talk non-conference play, and of course, then we'll dive into just the one lone blemish that has come for Tennessee in conference play. But just based off your expectations, what you saw. I mean, Tennessee goes through non-conference play. They really dominate, 13-0, obviously 13 straight wins. Some high-quality wins, beating Syracuse, beating a top 15 Baylor team. What did you see from this team in the non-conference? Was there anything that surprised you? Did it only reconfirm what you thought about this group? Obviously, there was some question. You lose a guy like a Dalton Knecht, who was so big for you last year, and there were a few other changes as well. But did anything stand out in particular in non-conference? Obviously, again, we'll get to conference play in a second. But, again, Vols they were perfect. They were unblemished in the non-conference slate.
I mean, yeah, I think the Illinois game was the big one because Illinois, we didn't know how good they would be ultimately this year and what kind of win that would be. But Illinois is a really good basketball team. They obviously put a drubbing on Indiana last night. So going in, stealing that game late with Jordan Gainey's layup in Champaign, a tough place to win and play. That turned out to be a much bigger game and a bigger indicator of what Tennessee was going to be. I mean, the ACC is just down across the board. So Tennessee beating up on Virginia, beating up on Miami. Miami's coach, Jim Larinaga, is not even there anymore. Like I said, Syracuse. Like the non-con was just not. We didn't really learn a whole lot about this team, and obviously Louisville too at the beginning. But I think what's different between this year and last year was like Tennessee got off to a more difficult start in the win-loss column. And it was because they were obviously in Maui, and you look at who they were playing early on last year. It was a murderer's row for Tennessee, and this year it was a lot more. Not easy. It was just a lot more beneficial for Tennessee to kind of ease into a big-time environment like Illinois in mid-December, and the non-con just wasn't all that difficult. But then you get to Arkansas at home, you kind of just want to see what it looks like in that, and we saw that Tennessee is now 2-1 here coming into this game against Georgia. But in terms of just the non-con, I think the most impressive thing for me that we saw from this Tennessee team this year versus last year, I think last year you saw that Tennessee had to get adjusted to playing with Dalton Knecht, and I think that was just something that took several months for guys like long-term veterans like Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi, Jonas Adu. There was just a lot of folks who have been with the program for a long time who had to kind of learn how to play next to a high-usage, high-volume scorer like Dalton Knecht. This year, Chaz Lanier coming in the same kind of fashion from North Florida. The difference was like this team was just, they knew who they were. Like this Tennessee team has known exactly what their roles are. Chaz knows he's a shooter. Zakai, obviously fourth year starter. He is just this team is built in a way that's just perfect for what Sakai is ultimately trying to do, which is like he's always driving and kicking. And this team shoots a lot of threes. This team is going to be obviously one of the best defensive teams in college basketball, but this is a more high volume three team than what we've seen really in any previous Rick Barnes coach team here at Tennessee in his decade on Rocky Top. But I think to me, what stood out in non-conference and why I was a lot more optimistic about this year's team than even last year's team was that there's no ambiguity of roles. Like, you know what everybody's doing. Zakai, Jordan Gainey, who's made the leap. He is a perfect combo guard off the bench. He knows exactly what he's supposed to do when he comes in. Jemai Mashak knows what he's supposed to do. You have Darlington DeBar, who's now the wild card, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second. But you have one of the benefits of having a smaller roster of scholarship guys is like these guys have to play with each other a lot. And like it's thin margins in terms of injury, but these guys have had to play together a lot this offseason, and they've had to play together a lot now for the better part of this season. It's 7 or 8, 9 guys, but they're playing so well with one another, and the chemistry is just so strong that there's just no questions about like what Felix Okpara's role as a rim running 5 and like what they need him to do. What do we need Cade Phillips to do? All right, we need you to defend 1 through 5, potentially rebound really well for your size, and he does that. And it just, to me, I think the most impressive thing about Barnes and this team to this point, and what we saw in non-con, was just this team knows exactly who they are. They're just an older, smart team that is going to defend an elite level. And I think when they're on, like they were against Arkansas, from deep, and these guys and Igor and company start putting up more threes, they're just going to be a really hard team to beat. Like their floor is just really high.
And so that leads us into, Chase, what we've seen through conference play to this point. Of course, like you mentioned, we are speaking Tennessee going to take on Georgia in their 4th conference game tonight at the time of our conversation. But 3 games in, 2-1 in conference play. Again, you take down Arkansas 76-52. You got the win over Texas, sandwich in between that 30-point loss at Florida that just, for whatever reason, again, watching that game, Chase, I'm sure you'd agree, it just – Florida jumped out to a lead, and they never looked back. I mean, that one really got away from Tennessee. But again, you get a close win at Texas. You do not take for granted a win on the road, especially this season in SEC play. So through 3 games in conference play, again, what have you seen from this group? Anything change? Anything, opinions on anything, or, that you feel like Tennessee needs to improve on, or did it kind of reconfirm what you had seen already to this point in non-conference?
I think the biggest thing right now, I'm very curious how Barnes handles DeBar going forward. We'll see. I'm very curious to see how many minutes he plays tonight against Georgia. I think he had 17 total. I mean, he bailed Tennessee out at Texas on Saturday. And one of the more frustrating things that we saw this past week for Tennessee was Igor is a good 3-point shooter, but Igor passed up a lot of threes. Like he was 1 for 1 against Texas, but he's a good shooter who's not shooting enough. And part of what I think Tennessee has to figure out and has to balance with their roster and their rotations is that Felix Okpara is obviously not shooting threes. He's not going to help you space the floor at the 5. And if you have Jemai Mashak starting, who did not take any threes this past week, has been banged up a little bit, teams are really, really playing off of him right now. So he's got to drive and make them pay for leaving him open from deep. And he's got to figure something out there because that's not going anywhere. I think teams are going to continue to defend him that way and make him make decisions and beat them in a different way. So when you have Zakai, who's, I think he's like at 30-ish% from 3, he's always going to be kind of a streaky shooter from deep. But it can't all fall on Chaz. Like you saw last week, Chaz has got to get those shots up as well. But I think Chaz will be fine. I'm not worried about Chaz Lanier and his threes as conference play continues on. But I do think there is a fine line between going so defense heavy that you kind of risk those kind of lulls that Tennessee finds themselves in sometimes under Barnes. So Dubar has confidence. He shot 40% from 3 in his last 2 years at Hofstra. He's a confident player. He's got to figure it out on the defensive end to some extent. But, I mean, you went through that a little bit last year with Dalton Knecht, too. It wasn't like Dalton Knecht was an all-American defensive player for Rick Barnes, but you kind of live with it because of how good he was for you offensively. And I think it's just a tough balance to find between Dubar and Mashak and what they do there on the wing, because I think there's a case that Dubar should start over Mashak at this point to give that starting lineup more shooting and more guys who are willing to shoot. Because if you run out here tonight against Georgia, I'm curious if they do Mashak, Igor, and Okpara again in your front court, like what does that look like? Do you have like 8 points at the 12-minute mark and you're like, okay, now we're going to start putting in some offensive firepower and Gainey and Dubar, but you kind of dug yourself a little bit of a hole. So I understand you want to go defense first and that kind of thing, but I do think this starting lineup needs a little bit more balance right now, because I think that's something that you saw plague Tennessee on the road in Austin and Gainesville. So Dubar, I'm really, really fascinated to see what kind of week he has, because he has an opportunity, if he continues to build off what he did on Saturday, that he could be a much bigger piece to the puzzle for Tennessee this year than I think a lot of folks may have thought when he came in from Hofstra.
Chase, you mentioned Rick Barnes. I've got a lot of buddies that are Tennessee fans that obviously cover Tennessee, but a lot of buddies that are fans of the Vols, and it's talking to them. It's kind of an interesting relationship with Rick Barnes because he's had so much success. And I mean, I think, listen, I mean, I think he's assisted in, engineering and putting together one of the better basketball programs in the conference, and certainly has led to Tennessee having one of the better athletics departments in the conference as well, well-rounded, everything school, what have you. But there's also this uneasiness that it feels like Tennessee gets to the postseason and they haven't always had a ton of postseason success under Rick Barnes. So, where do we sit right now? What's the mood of the fan base when it comes to Rick Barnes? He's been there for a while. It just kind of feels like the next step for the Vols is breaking through and, making a Final Four, or maybe even more. So, what's the vibe you pick up from the Tennessee fan base right now with this team and with their head coach?
I think it's great. I think right now, I mean, Barnes, I think a lot of fans are always like, oh, is this it? Because he's been with Sakai for 4 years, and he just loves Sakai Ziegler and coaching him. And Sakai might get another year, depending on what this NCAA ruling is of just everybody gets 5 years. That is coming down the pike here in the spring. So if that happens, maybe you get Sakai back for a 5th year and Mayshek, and that changes stuff. But I think for a lot of fans, they were probably a lot more antsy a couple of years ago because you didn't know how. You've seen so many older coaches like Larinaga who've left the sport because it doesn't work. Coach K, Larinaga, Jim Boeheim, you have Jay Wright. There's a lot of coaches in college basketball who they just haven't adapted well to the modern game, and just with NIL and everything else in the transfer portal. Barnes, I think, surprised a lot of folks here in how well he's adapted to the portal and this new era of college basketball. And I think he's kind of been re-energized by it. And I think that is a big win for Tennessee because the floor is so high. I mean, we talked about on our show last week, you and I, about Heupel and the floor he's raised Tennessee football to. I think Barnes in a similar way, but just with defense. Barnes his message still gets through. He's still the SEC has run through Barnes, Pearl, and Oates the last 4 years. You just look at the history of the top of SEC basketball over the last half decade. These 3 teams and these 3 programs are either winning the conference regular season title or the SEC tournament title. And these are unquestionably the 3 best programs in the conference right now. So I think you love it. You would like to make a Final Four. You want to get a number 1 overall seed for the first time in school history. That much is in play. You only can really drop, I think, 4 more in conference play to get that number 1 seed. But I think that's a big win. If they can get number 1 seed, the history there, you have a much better shot of getting to the Final Four. Last year, they were right there and just ran into Zach Edey, who they just, nobody had really an answer for Zach Edey outside of UConn. So I think fans are really excited because I think Dalton Knecht obviously was an unbelievable player and will be beloved here for forever. And I think Barnes just has adapted well to the new age of college basketball. So you're hey, as long as Rick Barnes wants to keep doing this and is able to operate at this elite level, then you love it. I mean, he's just a good dude and a really likable guy. And when he's winning like this, I think college basketball is a little bit different than college football because it's just so hard to win a national title in college basketball and to make it through multiple weekends and all that. So you just want a really, really good program that's going in the right direction and see what happens come March. And I think as long as Barnes wants to keep doing it and is up for it, then I think Vol fans are more than okay with Barnes leading this thing.
Chase, you mentioned the SEC and the dynamic of the conference, and I mean, it's a straight-up gauntlet this year. I mean, I don't know we've ever seen. This might be the greatest year of SEC basketball ever. Some of the latest bracketologies have 11 or 12 teams getting in. We could see 14 teams get in. I mean, it's really crazy to think about. But, I mean, looking at Tennessee's schedule, for example, and, again, a top 25 Georgia tonight at the time of us speaking here, a rivalry game showdown at Vanderbilt. But then you got a top 15 Mississippi State, at number 1 Auburn, Kentucky at home, a Florida team that beats you by 30 coming to Thompson-Boling, which will be really, really fascinating, a Missouri team that just beat that Florida team. So when you look, what stands out to you again when you look at just the SEC as a whole, the dynamic of the conference, not just from the scope of Tennessee's schedule, but I mean, your impressions of the SEC as a basketball conference. Chase, it feels like we got to kind of start touting the SEC as a basketball conference, at least in the 2024-2025 calendar year.
Yeah, I mean, even Florida, who just went down and upset, they obviously kicked the doors off Tennessee and Gainesville. I mean, it's just deep top to bottom. Like Ole Miss and Mississippi State are both legit. This is probably, I don't remember the last time both Mississippi schools were this good at the same time. They're both legit, and Mississippi State gave Tennessee all kinds of problems last year in the SEC tournament. And I think just two great coaches over there that have raised the floor there in a major way. Texas A&M, they got to get healthy a little bit, but they're for real. Mizzou, who didn't win a conference game last year, they're obviously moving, and they beat Florida, and they're off to a good start in SEC play. Bama is never going anywhere. They're always going to have an elite offense, and they're going to figure some stuff out. But I mean, to your point, I think the SEC stuff is just real. I don't know if it's sustainable year over year, but we'll see how Georgia looks as the SEC schedule goes along for them. But I mean, if Oklahoma and Texas are like at the bottom of your league, which is what it looks like right now, I mean, that's a really, really good league. Because like they're not doormats. It's just the top of this league and the top 10-ish, 10 to 12 is just really, really deep. And they're all built in very different ways, and they're good at different things, but there are a lot of legit teams. I mean, Kentucky is out here looking fierce as well, and Mark Pope's off to a great start there. So they're going to be really good down the stretch too. I mean, some big top 10 wins for them. So, I mean, we'll see on Arkansas as we talked about before we got started here. I mean, it's a brutal start for them, but I just don't think you can take any weekend off. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if Arkansas somehow clawed their way to half to 500 in SEC play, because they're that talented if they figure out how to put it all together. But right now it's not good. But the SEC is just every weekend on the road is just going to be tough. Tennessee goes to Vanderbilt, and that's not always been kind for the Vols in that weird arena, like just the seating arrangements and all that. It's a weird vibe whenever Tennessee goes to Vanderbilt. But we'll see how Tennessee fares there. But man, it's just hard to win on the road in this conference. So you take what you can get, like you did in Austin on Saturday. But the SEC is legit, and it's every week is going to be hard. But if you want to be a 1 seed, like, you got to be in that 5 to 6 loss range. So Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, they're going to be fighting to make sure those losses don't pile up too much.
Chase, a lot of folks I talk to, they ask me, Chris, I'll give you Bama or Auburn or the field. Who are you taking to win the conference? Tell me why Tennessee should be included in that conversation. And so many just want to say Bama or Auburn. That's who's going to win the regular season title, win the SEC title. Do the Vols have a legitimate claim that they should be in that conversation? And then looking at the rest of the season, in your mind, Chase, what's got to click for Tennessee if they're going to accomplish that and be standing at the top when the season concludes?
Well, I think they got to stay healthy, Like, that's the main thing. Is like Tennessee is down to 7-8 guys. And I mean, Cade Phillips is banged up right now. He's got to get healthy with his shoulder. Like you don't have a lot of you don't have a lot of margin for error. I mean, Cam Carr, you thought was going to give you 10, 12 minutes this year, a former 4-star in his second year. He leaves the program abruptly in the middle of the year to eventually enter the transfer portal. So that's another guy you thought you would at least have someone in the rotation you could go to here in SEC play. So I think for Tennessee to realistically compete with Auburn and Alabama at the end, I mean, I think their defense is going to keep them right there. I mean, they beat Auburn last year. Like, there's a lot of it's like where they play. So Tennessee has to go to Auburn. I don't think Tennessee's going to win at Auburn here in a couple weeks, but I don't think many people can win at Auburn right now. So I don't think that's like a huge indictment if Tennessee can't go in and win there, but they've won at Alabama in the past. So I think they can do that. And they match up better, I think, with Bama than they do with Auburn. But look at the Broom injury. I don't know how he's going to come back. So that's a big factor. But I would say in terms of the field, like, I would throw in Tennessee. Is kind of what I was talking about here a couple minutes ago. Is Tennessee the best bet of this conference? Is betting on one of Tennessee, Alabama, or Auburn to win the regular season title and win the conference title, because that's what's happened traditionally over the last couple of years. So I think Tennessee's defense you can still make the case, is the best in the conference. I think Zakai and Chaz Lanier playing 36 to 37 plus minutes a game just raises their floor so much that you're just getting elite guard play at all times, and they're just going to hound people. Lanier is going to shoot lights out. He's like, his numbers are really close to what they were at UNF. He had a rough week last week, but I think he bounces back in a strong way. And I think Tennessee is still getting acclimated a little bit with Igor, and he needs to get some more shots up. But I think Tennessee's top 8 is really, really good. So if that top 8 can stay healthy, I would put them in the conversation with anybody. And I think they're going to be a very, very hard pain in the butt out that is traditional under Rick Barnes.
Going to be fun to follow Chase all season long as, again, Rick Barnes and the boys chase not just an SEC regular season title, conference tournament, but, of course, the big dance upcoming in March. Again, Chase Thomas, the Chase Thomas podcast, does a fantastic job. Also, of course, founder and publisher of Vols Hub. Chase, in case people have been living under a rock, let them know where to check out all your great work.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. ChaseThomasPodcast.com, where you can get all of my previous episodes, learn more about the show and everything that we're doing. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on YouTube as well, and growing more and more each and every day. Full episodes, clips, shorts, all that good stuff over there. YouTube.com/Chase Thomas Podcast. VolsHub.com. Go subscribe there for all of my writing on Tennessee athletics. Like I'll be writing after this game tonight for tomorrow, and hopefully that's a good one. But all kinds of Tennessee content. I mean, all kinds of great guests. I can say this here. I don't know when this is going up, but I have a big time former Vol on the podcast this week. A lot of Tennessee baseball guys have been on, and just look out for all kinds of guests across the Tennessee media landscape and former players, coaches, all that good stuff over there on the program each and every day. So ChaseThomasPodcast.com.
Chase, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Appreciate you taking the time. Look forward to seeing you in Knoxville really soon.
Absolutely. It's going to be great.